My mother arrived at my wedding uninvited, wearing a pale gold dress and the expressions she used whenever she wanted strangers to believe she had been wounded. The chapel doors opened halfway through our vows. The pianist stopped first. Then every guest turned toward the aisle. My mother stood beneath the carved wooden arch, one hand pressed dramatically against her chest. "No daughter of mine humiliates her own mother," she announced. "Not after everything I did to keep you alive." Her voice echoed through the old chapel. She looked directly at me. "I spent years forcing a sentence into you while you cried, vomited, and behaved like the weakest child God ever created." A few guests lowered their eyes. Others stared at her in disbelief. I remained beside my fiancé, holding his hand. My mother believed she had just exposed my most shameful secret. She did not know that an elderly man was sitting in the last row. She did not know he had carried a locked metal case for 14 years. She did not know that 6 other people scattered throughout the chapel had come for the same reason. They had not come to watch me get married. They had come to watch my mother's carefully constructed life collapse. My name is Elena Marlowe. I was 30 years old when I married Daniel Reeves at St. Catherine's Chapel outside Savannah, Georgia. 3 months before the wedding, I sat at the kitchen island in our apartment while my mother's name flashed across my phone for the 11th time that week. Daniel placed a cup of coffee beside me. "You don't have to answer," he said. "I know." The ringing stopped. A voicemail appeared seconds later. I stared at it until Daniel quietly left the room. My mother's voice sounded soft when I finally listened. "Elena, sweetheart, please stop this. Your father is asking questions. Is that really what you want? Do you want him hearing terrible accusations from strangers?" That was how Lydia Marlowe threatened people. She never shouted when a whisper could do more damage. She made every warning sound like an act of protection. For most of my childhood, Savannah knew her as Lydia Marlowe, the compassionate wife of a quiet bookseller and the tireless director of the Bellwether Children's Trust. She chaired charity dinners, organized hospital donations, delivered food to grieving families, and remembered every pastor's birthday. People called her generous. Some called her an angel. My father called her remarkable. I had once called her mom. Now I let her messages collect unanswered. A week earlier, I had removed her name from the wedding guest list. She had responded by calling relatives, church friends, Daniel's parents, and eventually my father. My father, Thomas, owned a second-hand bookstore near Monterey Square. He was 63, gentle, intelligent, and so accustomed to surrendering arguments that he often apologized before anyone accused him of anything. When he called me that afternoon, his voice trembled. "Your mother says she isn't welcome at the wedding." "She isn't." "Elena, what happened?" I closed my eyes. The truth would destroy his marriage, his reputation, and every memory he had trusted for more than 30 years. But I could not tell him over the phone, not yet. "Dad, meet me Wednesday at the bookstore. Come alone." Should I be frightened? I looked toward the hallway closet. On the top shelf sat a white parcel my mother had mailed after I barred her from the wedding. Inside it was a silver baby bracelet, a lock of my childhood hair, and a note written in her familiar slanted handwriting. "You survived because I never stopped taking care of you." Daniel had already sent the hair to a private laboratory. The results were due in 4 days. "Yes," I whispered, "but not of me." My father remained silent. Finally, he said, "Wednesday then." After the call ended, I opened the closet and removed the parcel. The bracelet was wrapped in yellow tissue paper. My name and birth date were engraved on the back. The lock of hair had been tied with a faded green ribbon and placed inside a transparent pouch. For most families, it would have been a sentimental keepsake. For me, it might have been evidence. I had spent half my adolescence sick. From 14 to 19, I suffered violent nausea, dizziness, numbness in my hands, and sudden weakness that sometimes left me unable to walk without support. Doctors found no clear cause. My mother attended every appointment. She answered every question before I could speak. She carried a leather notebook containing lists of symptoms, medications, and foods she claimed triggered my attacks. Every morning, she prepared what she called my strengthening tonic. It tasted of peaches, honey, ginger, and something metallic I could never identify. Whenever I refused it, she cried. Whenever I drank it, I became sick. I had not understood the pattern until years later, but one man had. His name was Samuel Hart. He had been my high school cross-country coach. When I was 15, he noticed that I ran faster during overnight competitions than I did after eating breakfast at home. He started recording dates, meals, race times, and illnesses in a small black notebook. Then he asked the school counselor to investigate. 2 weeks later, an anonymous letter accused him of inappropriate behavior toward a female student. He lost his job before Christmas. His reputation disappeared soon afterward. For 14 years, I believed my mother had protected me from him. Then Samuel Hart's daughter walked into my office and told me the truth. Samuel Hart's daughter was named Claire. She joined my architectural firm in the spring of 2024, 2 years before my wedding. She was 29, sharp-eyed, reserved, and unusually skilled at restoring old homes without erasing the marks time had left behind. I liked her almost immediately. We worked together on a 19th-century boarding house near Forsyth Park. The building had survived 2 hurricanes, a fire, and decades of careless renovations. Claire believed damaged things should not always be made to look untouched. Sometimes the repair should remain visible, she told me one afternoon. Otherwise, people forget what happened. At the time, I thought she was talking about woodwork. We became friends slowly. She never forced closeness. She remembered how I took my coffee, noticed when I skipped lunch, and never asked questions when I went quiet. There were moments, however, when she seemed to know things I had never told her once. While we reviewed drawings in the conference room, someone opened a peach-flavored energy drink nearby. Claire's face changed. "I hate that smell," she said. "So do I." She looked at me for a second too long. Another time, she called me Lena. Only my high school coach had used that nickname. When I asked how she knew it, she said she must have heard Daniel say it. Daniel had never called me Lena. I let the lie pass. By then, I had become skilled at ignoring the feeling that something was wrong. That skill had been taught to me at home. My illnesses began in 9th grade. Before that year, I had been healthy and fast. I joined the cross-country team in September and finished my first 5-kilometer race in under 23 minutes. Coach Hart wrote my time in a black notebook. "You don't run like someone who gives up," he told me. 6 weeks later, I collapsed during morning assembly. My mother rushed into the school nurse's office with tears already in her eyes. She told everyone I had a rare digestive disorder and needed special supplements. No doctor had diagnosed such a disorder. Still, people believed her. They always did. Over the next 4 years, I visited emergency rooms, neurologists, stomach specialists, and blood clinics. Tests came back normal. My mother responded by becoming more devoted. She carried blankets into examination rooms. She corrected nurses who pronounced my name incorrectly. She cried in hospital corridors where people could see her. At home, she kept preparing the tonic, peaches, honey, herbs, vitamins, and what she called mineral drops. She stood beside me until I finished every glass. If I became sick afterward, she rubbed my back and whispered, "Mommy's here." The summer after 10th grade, Coach Hart took our team to a 7-day training camp in northern Georgia. For the first time in months, I ate without my mother watching. The dining hall served powdered eggs, toast, fruit, and terrible coffee. I felt stronger every day. By the final morning, I ran faster than I ever had before. Coach Hart waited beside the finish line holding his stopwatch. He did not celebrate. Instead, he asked, "What have you eaten this week?" I laughed because I thought he was joking. He wrote my answer down. After we returned to Savannah, my mother met the bus carrying a large bottle of peach tonic. She hugged me in front of the entire team. "My poor baby," she said. "You look exhausted." I drank half the bottle in the car. 25 minutes later, I vomited beside the road. Coach Hart had followed the bus back in his own truck. He saw us stopped near a petrol station. My mother told him I had caught a stomach virus at camp. He looked at the bottle in her hand. That was the day he began watching closely. He asked assistant coaches to record what I ate during away meets. He compared my race performance with the days my mother attended. He spoke privately with the school nurse. Eventually, he approached the guidance counselor, Margaret Bell. Margaret listened carefully. She agreed the pattern was concerning. But my mother served on the school foundation board. She had helped raise money for the new library and knew nearly every administrator personally. Margaret hesitated. She asked Coach Hart to give her 1 week. He never received it. 3 days later, the headmaster found an unsigned complaint inside his office mailbox. The letter claimed Coach Hart had been seen behaving improperly near the girls' changing rooms. There was no date, no witness, no evidence. But in a small city, accusation often travels faster than truth. Coach Hart was suspended immediately. My mother told me he had been dangerous. "He was obsessed with you," she said. I noticed it before anyone else. I believed her. I was 16 years old, frightened, sick, and completely dependent on the woman poisoning me. Coach Hart resigned before the investigation ended. His wife, Evelyn, taught violin from their home. After the accusation spread, parents withdrew their children from her lessons. Within 6 months, she lost nearly every student. Their finances collapsed. Their marriage did not survive the pressure. Evelyn died 3 years later after what the newspaper called a long private struggle. My mother attended the memorial. She brought flowers. Claire was 19 at the time. She stood in the back of the church and watched my mother comfort people who had helped destroy her family. 14 years later, Claire sat across from me in her apartment with a black notebook on the table. It was the first of 9. My father never stopped documenting what happened, she said. I stared at the notebooks. Why didn't he come to me? Because you believed your mother. The words were not cruel. That made them hurt more. Claire pushed a folder toward me. Inside was a copy of the anonymous complaint. Beside it was a grocery list discovered years later inside the original envelope. The handwriting was my mother's. The list read peaches, honey, vitamin powder, mineral drops, call Mercer Pharmacy, church cards. Bleach, one item had been scratched out so heavily that it was almost hidden. Claire placed a magnifying sheet over the paper. Beneath the ink, I could make out the word emetic. I looked up at her. What is that? Something that causes vomiting. The room seemed to tilt. Claire reached toward me, then stopped before touching my hand. My father was not watching you because he wanted to hurt you, she said. He was watching because he was the first person who understood that you were only sick after going home. I did not sleep the night Claire told me the truth. The 9 black notebooks sat on my dining table beside untouched cups of coffee while Daniel quietly read through page after page. Coach Samuel Hart had written everything: dates, meals, symptoms, race times, hospital visits. Every entry was factual. There were no angry outbursts, no revenge, only observations. October 18, breakfast at school during away meet, no illness. October 20, breakfast prepared by mother before practice. Vomiting before first period. November 2, stayed overnight with teammate. Healthy for 36 hours. The pattern repeated hundreds of times. Daniel looked up from the 4th notebook. He spent 14 years proving something no one wanted to believe. I nodded without speaking. My entire childhood suddenly felt like a courtroom where everyone had accepted the wrong testimony. The next morning, Claire drove me to a small retirement community outside Savannah. A woman opened the door before we knocked. She had silver hair tied neatly behind her head and wore reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Elena? She asked softly. I recognized her immediately, Dr. Rebecca Collins, the pediatric specialist who had treated me during high school. She looked older now, but her gentle voice had not changed. I've hoped you would come someday. She invited us inside. Boxes of medical journals covered one wall. She disappeared briefly into another room before returning with a thick brown folder. I kept personal notes, she said. The hospital records weren't enough. She opened the folder carefully. I believed you were being poisoned. The words hit me harder than anything Claire had shown me. You knew? I suspected. Then why didn't anyone help me? Pain crossed her face. I tried. She removed copies of letters addressed to Child Protective Services and the Hospital Ethics Committee. Every one of them had been withdrawn before submission. My attorney advised me not to continue after your mother threatened legal action. I stared at her. She threatened you? Rebecca nodded slowly. She accused me of defamation. She had influential friends on the hospital board. I was close to retirement. I wish I had fought harder. Tears filled her eyes. I'm sorry. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me for years. What made you suspect poisoning? She reached into the folder again. A blood sample. She handed me laboratory results dated 14 years earlier. The numbers weren't high enough for criminal certainty. I looked across the page. Repeated exposure, low dosage, consistent with long-term administration. I asked for additional testing. She sighed. Your mother refused permission, Claire quietly added. She refused every doctor who got too close. Rebecca nodded. Each time someone questioned your illness, your family simply stopped seeing that physician. I suddenly remembered. We had changed doctors constantly. Whenever someone suggested different testing, my mother claimed they were incompetent. At the time, it seemed reasonable. Now it looked deliberate. That afternoon, Daniel and I drove to Mercer Pharmacy. The small independent pharmacy had changed owners years earlier, but archived purchase records still existed. The elderly pharmacist welcomed us into a storage room lined with filing cabinets. My predecessor documented everything, he explained. Daniel handed him my mother's name. The pharmacist searched quietly before removing a faded ledger. There it is. He turned the book toward us. Between 2010 and 2015, my mother had repeatedly purchased syrup of Ipecac before it disappeared from most pharmacies. The prescriptions were legal. She claimed they were emergency supplies for church medical missions. She had bought bottle after bottle. My hands began shaking. Daniel squeezed them beneath the table. Outside the pharmacy, I leaned against the car. The warm Georgia air suddenly felt impossible to breathe. My entire childhood, Daniel wrapped his arms around me. I know, no. I looked at him. You don't. My mother held me while I was sick. I struggled to continue. She kissed my forehead. She prayed over me. She told me I was brave. Every memory that had once comforted me now felt contaminated. Daniel said nothing. He simply stood beside me. That evening, Claire invited us to Samuel Hart's home. The modest brick house sat at the end of a quiet street beneath enormous oak trees. Coach Hart answered the door himself. He looked older than I remembered, but his posture remained straight. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I whispered, "I'm sorry." He smiled sadly. "You were 16. I believed her. You were supposed to." Those 5 words nearly broke me. He invited us inside. On the living room wall hung framed photographs of his late wife Evelyn and Claire as a child. Beneath them rested a faded cross-country stopwatch. Coach Hart picked it up. "I kept this because it reminds me of who you really were." He pressed the button. "I timed every race you ever ran." He looked directly at me. "You weren't weak. You were one of the strongest athletes I'd ever coached." His voice remained calm. "I needed you to know that before anything else." Tears blurred my vision. For 14 years, I had believed my body had failed me. Now someone was telling me my body had been fighting every single day. Coach Hart opened a locked metal case. Inside lay 9 notebooks, photocopies of letters, photographs, pharmacy receipts, race results, witness statements, and newspaper clippings documenting every lie that had destroyed his career. He closed the lid again. "I promised myself I wouldn't use these unless you asked." He slid the case toward me. "They belong to you now." I looked at the metal case. It felt impossibly heavy, not because of what was inside, because it contained 14 years of someone refusing to let the truth disappear. Daniel finally broke the silence. "What do we do next?" Coach Hart answered before I could. "You decide. You can go to the police. You can expose her publicly. You can walk away." He paused. "But whatever you choose, make sure it's your decision. Not hers." The laboratory report arrived 9 days before my wedding. Daniel carried the sealed envelope into the kitchen without saying a word. He placed it in front of me. I already knew what it would say. I simply wasn't ready to read it. After several minutes, I opened it. The report analyzed the lock of hair my mother had mailed inside the silver bracelet. It confirmed prolonged exposure to substances capable of causing repeated nausea and vomiting during childhood. The conclusion was careful, scientific, measured. But one sentence refused to leave my mind. "The pattern is consistent with repeated administration over an extended period." I folded the report and stared through the kitchen window. "My entire childhood was manufactured," I whispered. Daniel sat beside me. "No," I looked at him. "Your mother's version of it was." 3 days later, I met my father at Marlowe Books. He was shelving history books exactly as he had done every Wednesday for decades. When he saw me, he smiled. "Coffee?" I nodded. We sat in the tiny office behind the bookstore. Stackers of novels surrounded us. For several minutes, we spoke about ordinary things, customers, weather, the wedding flowers. Finally, he looked at me. "You asked me here because something is terribly wrong." I reached into my bag and removed the laboratory report, then Coach Hart's notebooks, then the pharmacy records, then the anonymous complaint. Dad read quietly. He did not interrupt. He did not defend my mother. When he reached the final page, he simply lowered his hands. "I ate breakfast with both of you every morning." His voice barely existed. "I never noticed. You weren't supposed to. I failed you. You didn't know. I should have." His shoulders shook. It was the first time I had ever seen my father cry. "I'm sorry, Lena." I moved beside him and hugged him. For years, I had imagined this conversation ending with anger. Instead, it ended with grief. "I don't know who I married," he whispered. Neither did I. When he finally looked at me again, he asked only one question. "Is she coming to the wedding?" "No." He nodded slowly. "Then neither is she." Those 4 words changed everything. 2 days later, my mother appeared outside Daniel's office. She waited beside his car wearing sunglasses and carrying a white gift bag. "I only want 5 minutes," she said. Daniel refused. She smiled politely. "I know your newspaper has been asking questions." Daniel remained silent. She stepped closer. "You're making a terrible mistake believing Samuel Hart. I've read the evidence. Evidence can be manufactured. So can anonymous letters." For the first time, her smile disappeared. "You don't know what your fiancé is doing." "No," Daniel answered calmly. "But I know exactly what you're afraid of." She walked away without another word. That evening, Daniel received 3 anonymous emails accusing Coach Hart of manipulating students years earlier. Every attachment was fabricated. The metadata showed they had been created less than 24 hours earlier. She was still trying. Still building lies before the truth could arrive. Daniel forwarded everything to his editor, then deleted the emails. 5 days before the ceremony, Claire gathered everyone together: Coach Hart, Dr. Rebecca Collins, the retired guidance counselor Margaret Bell, the former headmaster, the pharmacist, my father, Daniel, me. 8 people sat around a long dining table. No one raised their voice. Coach Hart opened the metal case. "These are the only originals." He looked at me. "If your mother appears at the wedding, you don't argue. You don't shout. You don't insult her," Claire continued, "because people believe calm. They don't believe chaos." Daniel unfolded a seating chart. Each witness had a different place inside the chapel. No one would appear connected. If my mother interrupted the ceremony, every person she had harmed would already be present, not to attack her. To witness the truth. The plan was painfully simple. No speeches, no confrontation. Only evidence. If she stayed away, the wedding would continue peacefully. If she came, she would create the ending herself. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and warm. St. Catherine's Chapel overlooked the marshland outside Savannah. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows onto polished oak floors. Guests filled the pews one by one. Coach Hart sat quietly in the final row, carrying the old stopwatch. My father occupied the first pew. Claire sat halfway down the chapel. Dr. Collins remained near the back. No one spoke to anyone else. At exactly 3 o'clock, my father walked me toward the altar. His hand trembled. "I'm proud of you," he whispered, "for surviving." Daniel smiled as I reached him. The minister opened her book. "Dearly beloved." The ceremony had barely begun when the chapel doors burst open. Every head turned. My mother stood beneath the archway wearing a gold silk dress. She had timed her entrance perfectly. She wanted every guest watching. "No daughter humiliates her own mother," she shouted. Silence swallowed the chapel. Then she pointed directly at me. "I spent years forcing medicine into you while you threw up every morning. You were always weak. You needed me." Several guests gasped. She had not realized what she had admitted. I didn't answer. Neither did Daniel, neither did my father. The only sound came from the very back of the chapel. A chair slid quietly across the wooden floor. Samuel Hart stood up. He held the faded stopwatch in one hand. He looked only at me. "Elena," his voice was calm, "you decide what happens next." The chapel fell completely silent. My mother slowly turned toward him. The color drained from her face. She recognized him instantly. Then, one by one, other people began to stand. One by one, people rose from their seats, not dramatically, not angrily. Quickly, Dr. Rebecca Collins stood first, then Margaret Bell, the retired headmaster, the pharmacist from Mercer Pharmacy, my father, Claire, finally. Every person my mother had tried to silence was standing somewhere inside the chapel. None of them looked at one another. Every one of them looked at me. So my mother slowly turned in a circle. Confusion replaced confidence. "What is this?" she demanded. No one answered. She looked toward my father. "Thomas, tell them they're lying." My father remained where he was. For the first time in my life, he did not rush to protect her. Instead, he spoke calmly. "Lydia." She looked relieved. "Tell me they're wrong." The smile disappeared from her face. "They've manipulated you." He shook his head. "I've read the laboratory report." Her eyes widened. "I've read the pharmacy records." She took one step backward. "I've read Coach Hart's notebooks." She looked at me. "You showed him?" I showed him the truth. The chapel remained silent. No one interrupted. No one argued. Coach Hart walked slowly down the center aisle carrying the old stopwatch. He stopped several feet from my mother. I kept records for 14 years. He opened the metal case. Inside were the original notebooks. "I don't want revenge." He placed the first notebook on a nearby pew. "I wanted Elena to know she was never weak." Then he stepped aside. Claire walked forward next. She placed the anonymous complaint letter beside the notebooks. The handwriting was matched. She added the grocery list discovered inside the envelope, then the magnified photograph revealing the scratched-out word beneath the ink. No speeches, just evidence. Dr. Collins approached next. She handed the minister a sealed folder. My medical notes. She looked directly at my mother. I believed she was being poisoned. You threatened legal action before I could report it. Margaret Bell stepped forward. I delayed contacting Child Protection. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I've regretted that decision every day. The retired pharmacist quietly placed photocopies of purchase records onto the same pew. Repeated purchases, years apart, always under your name. Guests began whispering softly. Some recognized Lydia from charity events, others knew her from church. The woman they admired no longer resembled the person standing before them. My mother finally looked at me. You planned this. No, I answered quietly. You did. You poisoned your daughter. I kept you alive. You made me sick. I loved you. You loved controlling me. For several long seconds, she said nothing. Then she tried one last time. Turning toward the guests, she forced tears into her voice. Please, I'm her mother. I sacrificed everything for her. Before anyone could respond, my father spoke. No. Everyone turned toward him. You sacrificed everyone else. His voice remained steady. You sacrificed Coach Hart. You sacrificed his wife. You sacrificed doctors. You sacrificed innocent people. Finally, he looked at me. And you sacrificed our daughter. Silence returned. My mother stared at him as though she no longer recognized the man she had lived beside for 32 years. You'd choose them over me? He answered immediately. I choose the truth. Those 4 words ended their marriage. My mother looked around the chapel searching for someone. Anyone to defend her. No one moved. No one spoke. She adjusted the sleeve of her dress with trembling fingers. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit. The heavy chapel doors closed softly behind her. She never looked back. For nearly 30 seconds, nobody moved. Then the minister smiled gently. Shall we continue? A quiet laugh spread through the chapel. Daniel reached for my hands again. I believe, he whispered. This is where we were interrupted. I laughed through tears. So do I. The ceremony resumed. This time there were no more interruptions. When the minister finally asked whether I wished to marry Daniel Reeves, my answer carried through the entire chapel. I do. So do I. Daniel replied. The applause felt different now, not because we had exposed a lie, because we had survived it. The weeks that followed changed many lives. The newspaper published its investigation after every document was independently verified. The Bellwether Children's Trust removed my mother from its board. Several other charities quietly accepted her resignation. No criminal charges followed. Too much time had passed. Too many legal deadlines had expired. I accepted that justice does not always arrive wearing handcuffs. Sometimes it arrives as truth finally being believed. My father moved into a small apartment above his bookstore. Every Wednesday evening we shared dinner together before closing the shop. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we simply shelved books in comfortable silence. Coach Hart returned to volunteer coaching at a local youth running club. He never asked for recognition. The children simply knew him as the kind coach who believed every runner deserved another chance. Claire became my closest friend. Months later, while restoring its other historic house, she smiled at an old cracked staircase. You know, she said, I still think repairs should remain visible. I smiled back. So people remember? So people know healing happened. I understood exactly what she meant. As for me, I never again believed strength meant never falling. Real strength was standing at the altar after learning your entire childhood had been built on lies. It was choosing peace instead of revenge. It was allowing the truth to speak without shouting. Years later, our daughter asked why Grandpa Thomas always hugged her a little longer before leaving. I smiled. Because he learned that love isn't something you assume. It's something you choose. She nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. Maybe it did. Blood had once meant obedience. Now it meant something entirely different. Blood was the father who chose truth over comfort. Blood was the coach who protected a frightened teenager even after losing everything. Blood was the friend who spent years waiting until I was ready to hear the truth. And blood was the family Daniel and I built together. Not from fear, but from honesty. Some people inherit a family. Others build one. In the end, I discovered that the family worth keeping is the one that stands beside you when the truth finally walks through the door.